The iron collar bit into Riven's throat as she scrubbed the throne room floor, her knees raw against the cold marble. She kept her eyes down, counting the cracks in the stone. 17 between here and the dais. Anything to avoid drawing attention. In the 3 years since raiders had burned her village and taken her tongue, silence had become her armor. Above her, Lord Castor's voice echoed through the vaulted chamber. The Vampire King arrives at moonrise. Everything must be perfect, or I will have someone's hide. His boots clicked past her, close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath. You there, mute girl. Those corners better shine. Riven nodded without looking up, her long dark hair falling forward to hide her face. The other servants whispered that Lord Castor's estate sat on the border between human lands and the shadow territories, that vampires sometimes crossed over when hunting. They said the Vampire King himself ruled from an obsidian palace deep in the mountains, that he was ancient and terrible and beautiful as death. Riven did not believe in beautiful monsters. She had met enough of the ordinary kind. My lord, a servant called from the entrance. The advance guard has been spotted. They will be here within the hour. Lord Castor cursed, spinning on his heel. The west wing is not ready. Double the candles in the dining hall. And anyone, make sure that garden fountain is working. I will not have him think we live like peasants. Panic rippled through the room as servants scattered. Riven moved to rise, but a hand caught her shoulder, shoving her back down. Bastion, the head overseer, loomed over her with his ever-present whip coiled at his belt. Not you, he said, his thin lips curling. You will stay here and finish. Then the gallery. Then the entry hall. His fingers dug into her collarbone. And if you are not done by the time our guest arrives, you will learn what happens to lazy slaves who shame this household. Riven's hands trembled as she dipped her brush back into the bucket. She wanted to scream that one person could not clean 3 rooms in an hour, that his demands were impossible, that she had been working since dawn without rest. But her ruined tongue lay useless in her mouth, and Bastion's eyes dared her to try communicating her protest. He walked away laughing. The shadows grew longer as Riven worked, racing against the dying light. Her shoulders burned. Her fingers bled from scrubbing. When she finally stumbled into the entry hall with minutes to spare, Bastion was waiting with 2 other overseers. Too slow, he said simply, unfurling his whip. The first lash caught Riven across her back, and she bit down hard on her tongue, the small piece that remained, to keep from making a sound. She had learned early that her voicelessness enraged Bastion more than any defiance. He wanted her screams, her pleas. Her silence was the only rebellion she had left. 3 years you have been here, Bastion snarled, circling her as she knelt. 3 years of special treatment because you cannot talk back. Well, the Vampire King does not care about damaged goods, does he? The whip cracked again. Riven's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. In her mind, she retreated to the place she had built from memories, her mother's garden, where hollyhocks grew tall as houses, her father's workshop, smelling of cedar and varnish, her younger brother Finn's laugh, bright as bells. All of it ash now, all of it gone. She had been 16 when the slavers came, dragged from the burning rubble of her home. They had found her singing over her parents' bodies, a morning song her grandmother had taught her, and decided a girl with such a voice would fetch a higher price. When she had tried to sing for help during transport, they had hired a hedge which to cut out her tongue. Not so pretty now, are you? The witch had cackled, pocketing her coins. Riven had survived by becoming a shadow. She learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to read moods in the set of shoulders and the tightness around eyes. She communicated through gestures the other servants had learned to interpret. Mira, the kind kitchen woman who snuck her extra bread, old Garrett, the stable master who had once stopped Bastion's whip with a well-timed interruption. But neither of them was here now. The third strike split skin. The fourth drove her forward onto her hands. Bastion was breathing hard, working himself into the fever that sometimes took him, the one that did not stop until someone intervened or Riven stopped moving. My Lord Castor paid good money for you, he hissed. Least you can do is pull your weight. Through the ringing in her ears, Riven heard something, hoofbeats on the cobblestones outside, moving faster than any horse should. The great doors of the estate groaned open. Torchlight spilled across the entry hall's marble, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that Riven's breath misted before her face. Bastian raised his whip for another strike. And then a voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk. Stop. The word carried such absolute authority that Bastian froze mid-strike, his whip suspended in the air. Riven looked up through her tangled hair and saw him. The Vampire King stood in the doorway like a poem written in shadows and starlight. Tall, with hair black as a raven's wing that fell past his shoulders. He wore traveling leathers that seemed to absorb the torchlight. But it was his eyes that stole Riven's breath, mercury silver, ancient and knowing, fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Lord Theron, Castor rushed forward, his face flushed. We were not expecting you for another. What is happening here? Theron's voice remained soft, but something dangerous threaded through it. He moved into the hall with inhuman grace, his boots silent on the marble. His gaze never left Riven. Just disciplining a lazy slave, my lord, Bastian said, lowering his whip slowly. Nothing that need concern. Look at me. Bastian turned, confusion flickering across his features. The moment their eyes met, he went rigid. Riven watched, transfixed, as Theron took 3 measured steps forward. The vampire's nostrils flared slightly, as if scenting the air. How long has this been happening? Theron asked quietly. She did not finish her duties, my lord. The punishment is standard. How long? The compulsion in those 2 words made even Castor step back. Bastian's face had gone pale. 3 years, lord, since she arrived. Something flickered across Theron's perfect features. Fury perhaps, or pain. He moved past Bastian as if the man were merely furniture and knelt beside Riven. This close, she could see the inhuman beauty of him, the way his skin seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight. He smelled of night, blooming jasmine, and something wild she could not name. May I? He asked, reaching toward her shoulder. Riven did not understand what was happening, but she nodded. His fingers were cool against her skin as he gently turned her, examining the fresh wounds across her back. His jaw tightened. 3 years, he repeated almost to himself. Then he looked directly into her eyes, and Riven felt the world tilt. Can you speak? She shook her head, then carefully opened her mouth to show him the scarred remnant of her tongue. The sound that came from Theron was barely human, a growl that resonated in her chest. His eyes flashed crimson for just a moment before returning to silver. When he stood, his movements were too fast to follow, and suddenly he was inches from Bastian's face. Who gave the order? I only followed Lord Castor's instructions, Bastian stammered, backing away. The mute girl needed discipline. She is property, nothing more. Theron's hand shot out, gripping Bastian's throat and lifting him off his feet with impossible ease. Property, he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire hall. You speak of people as property in my presence? My lord, Castor rushed forward, his hands raised placatingly. Surely we can discuss this reasonably. The girl is mine by right of purchase. Whatever offense has been given, I am certain we can reach an accommodation. Accommodation. Theron dropped Bastian, who collapsed gasping to the floor. The Vampire King turned to Castor, and even from her position on the ground, Riven could see the human lord's confidence crumble. You invite me here to negotiate safe passage through your lands for my people, and I arrive to find you torture a defenseless woman for sport. Not sport, my lord. Discipline. Surely even in the shadow territories, servants must be. In my territories, Theron interrupted, his voice like winter frost. Those who harm the helpless answer to me personally. He glanced at Riven again, and something in his expression softened. How much did you pay for her? Castor's eyes lit with avarice. Well, she was quite expensive. A specialty purchase, you understand. The initial cost, plus the witch's fee, plus 3 years of feeding and housing. I would say 500 gold crowns would be fair compensation. Done. Theron pulled a small pouch from his belt and tossed it to Castor. It landed with a heavy clink. She comes with me. Riven's heart lurched. She had been sold again, passed from one master to another like a piece of furniture. The brief hope that had flared at Theron's intervention guttered and died. Of course, vampires were no different than humans. They simply had prettier faces and sharper teeth. But then Theron knelt beside her again, and his next words were spoken so softly that only she could hear them. I am not purchasing you as property. I am buying your freedom. Do you understand? Riven stared at him, searching those ancient silver eyes for deception. She found none, only a fierce protectiveness that made no sense. He was a stranger. She was nothing. Why would a king care about one ruined slave girl? Can you walk? He asked. She nodded, though her back screamed in protest. Theron stood and offered his hand. His skin was cool against her palm, but his grip was steady as he helped her to her feet. The entry hall spun slightly, and she swayed. I have you, he murmured, his arm moving to support her waist. Then louder, to Castor, our negotiations are concluded. I will send word if I decide your lands are worth my people's restraint. The journey to Theron's encampment passed in a blur of pain and confusion. He had lifted Riven onto his horse, a massive black creature with eyes too intelligent to be merely animal, and mounted behind her, one arm secure around her waist. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely safe. Just a little farther, he said softly near her ear. My healer is waiting. The camp materialized from the darkness like something from a dream. Elegant black tents surrounded a central fire where figures moved with that same liquid grace Theron possessed. Vampires, Riven realized. She was surrounded by vampires. A woman with copper hair rushed forward as Theron dismounted. My king, we heard. Her golden eyes fixed on Riven with shock. Is that? Yes. Theron's voice was strained. He lifted Riven down with impossible gentleness. Isolde, she needs healing. Her back is shredded, and her tongue was cut out years ago. Isolde's expression hardened. Who dared? Later. Please. The healer guided Riven into the largest tent, where soft furs covered the ground and lanterns cast a warm glow. She helped Riven lie on her stomach, then began cleaning the wounds with practiced efficiency. Theron paced nearby, his agitation evident in every sharp turn. How is it possible? Isolde murmured as she worked. In 300 years you have never, and now, of all times, at a human estate. Not the estate alone. Theron stopped pacing and ran a hand through his hair. I walked in and heard the whip crack, heard her trying not to scream, and something inside me just knew. He looked at Riven, and his eyes held centuries of loneliness. The bond snapped into place like it had been waiting all this time. Riven's breath caught. Bond? What bond? Isolde must have sensed her confusion because she paused in her ministrations. You do not know about soulmates, do you, child? Riven shook her head carefully. Among our kind, Isolde explained, her hands glowing with soft silver light as she worked. There exists a bond that forms between two souls meant to be together. It is exceedingly rare. Most vampires live entire lifetimes without finding their match. When it happens, though, there is no mistaking it. The connection is instant, absolute, undeniable. Theron knelt beside Riven so she could see his face. When I heard your pain, it was like someone drove a stake through my own heart. Every instinct I possess screamed to protect you, to heal you, to destroy anyone who had hurt you. His voice dropped to a whisper. I have lived for 3 centuries, Riven. I have ruled kingdoms, fought wars, seen empires rise and fall. But I have never felt anything like what I felt the moment I saw you. Riven's hands moved frantically, gesturing her confusion, her disbelief. A soulmate. Her. A broken slave with no voice, no family, nothing to offer. It had to be a mistake. Theron was a king, beautiful and powerful and eternal. She was nobody. I know what you are thinking, Theron said softly, catching her hands in his. You are thinking this cannot be real, that you are not worthy, that I will realize my error and send you away. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. But you are wrong. The bond does not lie, Riven. It does not care about crowns or power or station. It only recognizes souls that match. Isolde finished her work, and already Riven could feel the pain receding as supernatural healing knit her flesh. Her back will scar, but the wounds will close by morning, the healer said. As for her tongue, she hesitated. That is old magic, deliberately cruel. I can ease the scar tissue, but regenerating what was taken would require power beyond my skill. Theron's jaw clenched. Then we will find someone with that skill. My king, a male voice called from outside the tent. We have a problem. A dark-haired vampire entered, young-looking but with eyes that betrayed his age. Lord Castor sent riders to the neighboring estates. He is claiming you stole his property and threatened his life. 3 human lords are demanding your immediate departure from the borderlands, and there is talk of raising militia. Let them try, Theron said coldly. There is more. The vampire glanced at Riven, then back to his king. They are offering 1,000 gold crowns for her return. They are calling her a dangerous escaped slave who has bewitched you. Riven's blood turned to ice. She had seen what happened to escaped slaves when they were caught. The punishments were designed to ensure no one else tried. They would make an example of her and anyone who had helped her. She pulled her hands from Theron's and gestured urgently. Go. Leave me. Save yourself. Absolutely not, Theron said, understanding her meaning instantly. I do not abandon people I care about, especially not the woman the universe chose for me. But Riven shook her head fiercely. She pointed to him, then to the tent entrance, then made a shooing motion. How could she explain that she was not worth a war? That 3 years of survival had taught her that people like her did not get happy endings? That the kindest thing he could do was let her go before she destroyed everything he had built? She stood abruptly, ignoring Isolde's protest, and moved toward the tent exit. Theron blocked her path. Where do you think you are going? Riven's eyes filled with tears. She touched his chest, then her own, then shook her head. Not meant to be, not possible, not real. You are running, Theron said quietly. Not from danger, but from hope. From the possibility that you might actually deserve happiness. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. I have spent 300 years alone, Riven. I am not losing you because you think you are not worthy of being saved. Outside the tent, voices rose in heated argument. Riven could hear Castor's affected noble accent cutting through the night. The vampire king harbors a criminal. This is an act of war against human territories. Theron's expression hardened. Stay here, he told Riven. I need to handle this before it escalates. He strode toward the tent entrance, then paused. Isolde, don't let her run. Please. The healer nodded, positioning herself near the exit with a sympathetic smile. He's right, about deserving happiness. I've known Theron for a century. I've never seen him like this. You've already changed him. Riven sank onto the furs, wrapping her arms around herself. Through the tent fabric, she could hear Theron's voice, cold and commanding. Lord Castor, you've made a grave miscalculation coming here. I want my property returned, Castor demanded. You paid for her, yes, but under false pretenses. That gold was obtained through coercion and threat. The transaction is void. The transaction, Theron said with dangerous calm, involved me purchasing a human being. In my lands, such transactions don't exist. She is not property. Not mine, not yours, not anyone's. Then you admit she has no legal protector. By borderland law, she reverts to, she has a protector. Theron's voice dropped to something that made even Riven shiver. Me. And I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully. You'd start a war over a damaged slave girl? Castor laughed, though it sounded forced. What is she to you? Entertainment? A novelty? You can't possibly. She is my soulmate. Silence fell like a blade. Even the night sounds seemed to pause. Impossible, Castor finally breathed. Vampires don't bond with humans. It's a myth. A children's story. It's rare, Theron corrected. Not myth. And it just happened. Which means, Lord Castor, that any harm to her is harm to me. Any threat against her is a declaration of war against my entire kingdom. So I'll ask you plainly, do you really want to test whether I'm bluffing? Riven stood slowly, her heart hammering. Through a gap in the tent fabric, she could see Theron's silhouette backlit by firelight. A king defending not his territory or his pride, but her. Someone was finally fighting for her, not against her. Something inside her chest cracked open. A door she'd kept locked for 3 years. The overwhelming need to run ward with an equally overwhelming need to stay. To trust. To believe that maybe, impossibly, she was worth fighting for. She made her decision. Riven pushed past Isolde and stepped out of the tent. Every eye turned to Riven as she crossed the space between the tent and where Theron stood facing Castor and his armed escorts. She was barefoot, wearing only the thin slave dress that marked her station, but she held her head high. 3 years of being invisible, and now she chose to be seen. Theron's expression transformed when he saw her. Concern and fierce pride warring in his features. "Riven, you should rest." She shook her head and walked straight to his side. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, and she felt it. That spark of connection Isolde had described, thrumming through her like a second heartbeat. She squeezed once, firmly, and looked up at him with everything she couldn't say written in her eyes. "I choose this. I choose you. I'm not running anymore." Theron's breath caught. "You're sure?" Riven nodded, then turned to face Castor. The man who'd purchased her, who'd allowed Bastion's cruelty, who'd worked her until her hands bled and her back broke. She didn't flinch from his gaze. Instead, she lifted her free hand and pointed at him, then made a sharp, cutting motion across her throat. Not a threat, but a severing. "You have no power over me anymore." "This is absurd," Castor sputtered. "She can't even speak. How can she consent to anything? For all we know, you've enthralled her, used vampire magic." "I don't need magic." Theron's voice carried absolute certainty. "Look at her, Castor. Really look. Does she seem enthralled? Or does she seem like a woman making her own choice for the first time in years?" One of Castor's escorts, a grizzled captain, shifted uncomfortably. "My lord," he said quietly, "the girl does seem willing." "Willing?" Castor's face flushed crimson. "She's defective merchandise trying to escape her lawful owner." "Enough." The word cracked through the air like thunder. Theron stepped forward, and the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the grass at his feet. "You will leave my camp. You will return to your estate. And you will spread the word through every human territory that borders my lands. Riven is under my protection. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or attempts to reclaim her will answer to me personally. Is that sufficiently clear?" Castor opened his mouth, but the captain grabbed his arm. "My lord, we should go. Now." "This isn't over," Castor hissed, but he was already backing toward his horse. "The Council of Lords will hear of this. There will be consequences. There will be," Theron agreed. "Just not the ones you're imagining." As Castor and his men rode into the darkness, the tension in the camp slowly dissolved. Vampires who'd been positioned as guards relaxed. Isolde appeared at Riven's other side, a warm cloak in her hands. "You're shaking," the healer said gently, draping the fabric around Riven's shoulders. Riven hadn't realized. Now that the confrontation was over, the enormity of what she'd done crashed over her. She'd chosen freedom over safety, hope over certainty, a vampire king over the familiar horror of slavery. Theron turned to her, his silver eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though tears were streaming down her cheeks now, not from pain or fear, but from release. 3 years of silent suffering, and finally, someone had listened. The journey to Theron's kingdom took 3 days, and with each mile, Riven felt the weight of her chains, invisible but no less real, falling away. The vampires treated her with respect, even deference, which bewildered her until Isolde explained that as the king's soulmate, she held a position of honor among them. "You're not just his match," Isolde said as they rode. "You're his equal, his partner. In our culture, that means something." The obsidian palace rose from the mountains like a crown of black diamonds. Inside, Theron's kingdom was nothing like Riven had imagined. Yes, there was grandeur, soaring ceilings, and ancient tapestries, but there was also warmth. Laughter echoed through the halls. Vampire children played in courtyards. Felt like a home, not a tomb. Theron gave her a suite of rooms adjoining his own, with explicit instructions that she could lock the connecting door whenever she wished. "We have time," he told her gently. "The bond isn't a cage. It's an invitation. You decide what we become." Over the following weeks, Riven began to heal. Not just her body, but her spirit. Theron introduced her to his court, where a mage named Callista examined her tongue with ancient eyes. "The witch who did this used blood magic," Callista said grimly. "Reversing it will be painful, and there's no guarantee of success." Riven made the gesture she and Theron had developed. "Do it anyway." The ritual took hours. Riven gripped Theron's hand until her fingers went numb, and he never once let go. When Callista finally stepped back, exhausted, Riven's mouth burned like fire. "Try," Theron whispered. Just one word. Riven's heart hammered. She opened her mouth, felt the new weight of her restored tongue, and pushed sound through vocal cords that hadn't worked in 3 years. "Theron." Her voice was hoarse, broken, but real. "My name is Riven." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt wetness on her cheek that wasn't her own tears. "I know," he said roughly. "I've always known." In the months that followed, Riven learned what freedom truly meant. She studied with Callista, discovering she had an aptitude for healing magic. She trained with Isolde in self-defense, because never again would she be helpless. She explored the kingdom that was now hers as much as Theron's, and everywhere she went, people smiled at her. Not with pity, but with genuine warmth. And slowly, carefully, she let herself fall in love. It wasn't the bond that did it, though the connection thrummed between them like music. It was the way Theron listened when she spoke, treasuring every hard-won word. The way he asked permission before touching her, even after she'd made clear her trust. The way he'd wake from nightmares of finding her too late, and she'd hold him until the trembling stopped. One evening, they stood on the palace balcony watching the sun set over the mountains. Riven's hair had grown longer, her body had filled out with regular meals, and when she caught her reflection now, she sometimes didn't recognize the confident woman staring back. "What are you thinking?" Theron asked, his arm around her waist. "That I was so afraid," Riven said, her voice growing stronger with each day of use. "Afraid to hope, afraid to trust, afraid that if I let myself believe in happiness, it would be ripped away." And now, she turned to face him, this ancient king who'd given her back her voice, her choices, her life. "Now I think maybe the universe knew what it was doing. Maybe we were both alone for so long because we were waiting for this, for each other." Theron smiled, that rare, unguarded expression he saved only for her. "I spent 300 years ruling a kingdom, but I didn't start living until I heard you scream." Riven touched his face, marveling that she was allowed this intimacy. "I spent 3 years silent, but I didn't start speaking until you taught me I had something worth saying." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Riven felt the last piece of her broken heart slot into place. She'd been whipped, silenced, sold, and discarded, but she'd survived. And on the other side of that survival was something she'd stopped believing in. A love that saw her not as property or burden, but as precious, as chosen, as home. "What happens now?" she whispered against his lips. Theron pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, silver meeting brown. Now we build a life together. Write new laws that protect people like you once were. Maybe even negotiate real peace with the human territories on our terms." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "The bond brought us together, Riven. But what we do with forever, that's entirely up to us." Riven smiled, a real smile, full of hope and promise and joy. "Then let's make it extraordinary." This story explored themes of voicelessness, survival, and finding worth in the darkest places. Have you ever discovered strength you didn't know you had? What's your biggest takeaway from Riven's journey? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if this story moved you, consider subscribing for more tales of resilience and unexpected love.